What's going on, everyone? Thanks for joining me again. Kalen here. Welcome to the channel. In honor of Black History Month, today's essay is going to be on none other than the great writer and orator James Baldwin. You can find this article, as always, on my Medium and my Substack, and I'm going to jump right into it. I've often thought that the story of Black history is inseparable from the larger history of Western development. This is primarily because the history of Black people is inextricably tied to the story of America and Europe. In fact, there truly is no study of American history that could be complete without factoring in the story of Black people. To my mind, Black history then is a critically essential and myopic perspective within the larger context of American history. Also, I think it is necessary to distinguish between the history of Black people who arrived on the American landmass as slaves and their descendants, and the history of Black Africans who were never enslaved. The term Black history, at least as it is currently used in America, does not refer to the latter. So when we say Black history, we need to differentiate between American Black history and African Black history. This is because while there certainly is a generalized history of the Black diaspora, there are key periods within the last 500 years or so in which certain segments of the Black diaspora have undergone a much different history than other segments. The term Black history is also different from the reality of Black history. By this, I mean that what Black history has come to mean symbolically contrasts markedly from what it is in its totality. Currently, the idea of Black history revolves around key figures like Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and other popular characters who made their mark in the mid-20th century, struggling for racial, political, and economic equality through resistance of the white power structure in their day. While their struggles and those of other groups such as the Black Panthers and the Nation of Islam are high-profile components of Black history, we typically neglect to discuss the larger scope of Black struggle and, more importantly, Black thought that was characterized by people like Marcus Garvey, sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois, psychologist Franz Fanon, and writers James Baldwin, Frederick Douglass, and Amercia Baraka. In this vein, I'd like to focus on the work of one James Baldwin. Born in Harlem, New York in 1924 to a single mother, he became one of America's most deeply insightful writers and critics of racism and bigotry. In a letter to his brother's son, he discusses why, in spite of the brutal racial discrimination levied against Blacks at the time, he must love his brothers and sisters, the whites, who psychologically and physically denigrated him and his people to the doldrums of society. Baldwin reasons with a sort of biblical psychology that whites must be forgiven by Blacks, for they know not what they do. He was very keen in his letter to point out that whites would be quick to vehemently deny that they possessed racial superiority, although the circumstances, economic and social, Blacks were relegated to proved otherwise. Baldwin writes, "It is the innocence which constitutes the crime."
And furthermore, I hate to use this word, but in a sense, that innocence can be, in crucial moments, a very grave danger.
Baldwin's idea is that whites fear the loss of their identity as the superior race. Therefore, while knowing the truth, and in order to maintain the American status quo, whites have necessarily had to believe that Black men are inferior. For Baldwin, an apparent psychological contradiction and sickness manifests when whites pretend that Blacks have not been downtrodden and beat down socially, physically, and economically. He writes that it is very difficult for whites to act on what they know because, quote, "To act is to be committed, and to be committed is to be in danger." In this case, the danger in the minds of most white Americans is the loss of their identity, end quote. And I might add, the disgrace of their heritage and legacy. James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time, a modern American prophecy. James Baldwin, in his work, The Fire Next Time, writes, "The Negroes of this country may never be able to rise to power, but they are very well placed indeed to precipitate chaos and ring down the curtain on the American dream." This is perhaps the most stilling assertion within his short but powerfully telling book, which consists of 2 letters deftly speaking upon everything from the hypocrisy of American piety to the intricacies of Black autonomy and self-determination. After finishing this timeless work, I decided I would definitely write my opinion of it. I knew that I needed time to allow its contents to sit upon my soul. So I gave myself about a week to allow his spirit to be fully digested by my own. Baldwin, if you are unaware, requires more than just a cursory read. One needs to allow his message to marinate within one's psyche, to quietly compare the depictions he puts forward in his writing with the reality one experiences in their own existence. Only then can one accurately assess Baldwin. He has an uncanny ability to get to the bleeding heart of the matter, And although he uses sarcasm to demonstrate the foolish hypocrisy of American moralism, he uses it in such a charming way that one really has little choice but to laugh and agree with him, even if one honestly disagrees.
Tend to white people, when they rise, they're heroes. And, everyone is very proud of brave little Israel, a state against which I have nothing. I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm not an anti-Semite. But, when the Israelis pick up guns, or the Poles, or the Irish, or any white man in the world, says, give me liberty or give me death, the entire white world applauds. When a black man says exactly the same thing, word for word, he is judged a criminal and treated like one, and everything possible is done to make an example of this bad nigger so there won't be any more like him. Now, you can do this if you like, until your party is over. But I know, after all, who my heroes are. And George Washington is not one of my heroes, for example.
James Baldwin was born in New York City in 1924 into a culture of hatred and violence towards black Americans. He grew up witnessing much of the cruelty, anger, death, and despair caused by racist attitudes and policies firsthand. His writing is indicative of this. Have racist attitudes in America genuinely changed? Baldwin writes, quote, I was 13 and was crossing 5th Avenue on my way to the 42nd Street Library, and the cop in the middle of the street muttered as I passed him, quote, why don't you niggers stay uptown where you belong, end quote. He goes on, quote, when I was 10 and didn't look certainly any older, 2 policemen amused themselves with me by frisking me and making comic and terrifying speculations concerning my ancestry and probable sexual prowess, and for good measure, leaving me flat on my back in one of Harlem's empty lots, end quote. Today, in 2024, though blatant displays of racism seem to have lessened, I wonder if the madness of racism is not still very much present, if not well hidden. What if, though black people are able to get jobs and education, whites still believe they occupy a normative position of paternal superiority? In other words, are whites nurtured to believe that, in fact, they should dominate and administrate global society, i.e., the norms, customs, traditions, and economic practices of the human race? I ask because it is obvious that large and inescapable portions of white European history are colored by the elimination, subjugation, and domination of human beings, particularly indigenous peoples. There is not a sector of the planet that has not been negatively touched by European hands. In addition to whatever benefits Europeans have brought with them on their conquests of foreign lands, they have also brought war, famine, plague, destruction, and death. While a monopoly on evil does not exist, white historians, such as the Christian ethicist Dr. Nigel Bigger, attest to this. Without question, Europeans, at least since recorded history, have been conspicuous purveyors of chaos and violence throughout the world. Again, all of humanity has spilled blood in the names of various causes, some justified, some ignoble. However, the insanity of spilling blood and destroying human life due to racial phobia has been a peculiarly Western and white phenomenon. Baldwin spoke candidly about this, saying to his nephew of white people, quote, you must accept them, and accept them with love. They have had to believe for many years and for innumerable reasons that black men are inferior to white men, end quote. He writes, they, the blacks, simply don't wish to be beaten over the head by the whites every instant of our brief passage upon this planet. White people in this country will have quite enough to do in learning how to accept and love themselves. And when they have achieved this, which will not be tomorrow, and may very well be never, the Negro problem will no longer exist, for it will no longer be needed. Baldwin's cure for racism. In the latter passage, Baldwin suggested, as racism's cure, something popular thinkers and religious activists have espoused and continue to articulate. That is, that love is the final solution to turn the horrific reference into something positive for hatred. This is what makes Baldwin different from other thinkers of his time, most notably black nationalists like Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam, and the Black Panthers. Whether you agree with him or not, the idea that humans have the capability to voluntarily see each other as equal and abide by the spiritual laws of compassion, kindness, and fairness, while not a novel one, still retains a timeless attractiveness. As such, the question of whether billions of people on the planet can embrace this way of living is worth exploring. If America doesn't investigate this opportunity, she faces the inevitability of self-destruction, as Baldwin noted. Now, when we talk about love, we're not talking about any one particular kind of love, especially a romantic love, a conjugal love, or, a familial love. What we're talking about is a love-based compassion. It's a seek to understand first, seek to build and harmonize with others first way of looking at the world. When you orient yourself, your mindset, your perspectives to that way, that line of thinking, the world becomes a better place by default. It doesn't mean that all the problems of evil and anger and aggression and war and bickering will be solved, but it lessens the prospect of those negative phenomena occurring and affecting humanity. Are white people afraid of black success? Today, black people have more chances than ever to succeed financially. This is good. Even in troubling economic times, the average person in possession of, say, a cell phone and an internet connection is capable of more than eking out for himself. With a little hard work and a good idea, a living. With a bit of ingenuity, most people can erect a thriving business. We have the invention of the internet to thank for this. However, in terms of long-term wealth and financial stability, black people have a long way to go. The legacy of slavery, racism, and lack of financial education continue to be the salient factors that contribute to our current economic position. It may not be said loudly or boldly bannerized, but the idea of an overwhelmingly wealthy black America, a black America which owns the majority of its assets and deals with white America in financial matters equally and with the conscience of one people, scares white America. Perhaps white America is fearful because this phenomenon manifested would threaten a centuries-old economic power base. Additionally, it is possible that whites feel blacks will rise up and retaliate against the sons and daughters of slave owners. This isn't to say that all white families own slaves. Obviously, all white families did not own slaves. Many didn't even have the resources to purchase slaves, much less run a business which saw slaves operating for economic purposes on a plantation setting. But if there is a fear that whites have, it's that blacks will indiscriminately kill whites or riot or find some way to take power back from whites. And this fear is rooted perhaps in the idea of a white fragility or some type of belief that retribution will be levied on them. Whatever the reason is, whites need not fear such a response from black people. We have never been the kind of people to grossly incite fear or demonstrate unwarranted malice, at least no more than any other group of people. To the contrary, whatever fear, anger, and aggression American black people currently possess is purely in response to a history of abuse and denigration by the attitudes and laws imposed upon black people by white people. Final thought. Whether or not literal fire will come from the sky and blast humanity out of existence, as some Christian scientists believe, and as Baldwin satirically alluded to, we cannot be sure. However, we can be certain that if love is not explored and embraced as a way of mutually coexisting on this planet, the chance that life will descend into hell on earth becomes all but certain. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Please share and subscribe. Again, you can check this article out on my Medium and on my Substack. Until next time, enjoy Black History Month. Peace.